is really happening in Corpus Christi. I'm Joe Bryan, your host for this show, and we're taping this program on April the 30th. Well, little program note for the future. Starting in the month of June, on June the 3rd, our program will be shown at a different time. 8:30 in the evening on a Monday. 8:30 in an evening on a Monday. That starts June the 3rd into the month of December. The next meeting, the board of the Taxpayers Association, is scheduled for the 2nd of June. Golly, have we got into the summer already? June the 2nd, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Town and Country Restaurant on South Alameda Street. And once again, all our meetings are open to one and all. Well, the hot topic, of course, is the city needs $55 million per year in order to get our streets back in shape. And where's that money going to come from? Well, of course, it has to come out of your pocket. It's your city. City Council has had 4 workshops. The staff's done a pretty good job of presenting the various options, coming up with additional funds. Of course, it's going to be, I think, almost impossible at the moment for the elected officials to vote an additional $55 million every single year to fix our streets. Mr. Alessandro had a comment at the last council meeting that I thought was quite appropriate. First of all, he disagreed with the fact that they'd come up with $55 million. The point he was making was we want to come up with what we can afford. And the whole point being to start working towards that $55 million that's needed every single year. In 10 years, that's $550 million. And I thought as an exercise in futility, I would compare the total debt that we have today. How much interest do you think we're paying on the total debt that we have? Now, the interest amount on debt that has been issued for government issues. Don't forget now, our city is really divided into 2 parts. We have the governing or government, and we have the enterprise, which is like a business being run by a private individual. Interest amount that we owe today on the amount of debt that we run up for the government part of our governing body comes to $143.7 million. $143 million. This is interest to be paid over the next 20 years or so. Now, in the business part, the debt that we've accumulated as of today, the amount of interest we're going to pay on that debt is $333.3 million. Then we have a debt on Choke Canyon. We still owe something like, I think it's about $60 million in principal on the Choke Canyon issue. And the amount of debt we're paying over the next about 20 years comes to $40.3 million. And then is the contract we have with the folks up at Lake Texana for the Texana water. Would you believe the interest on that debt is $50.4 million. Now you add all those numbers together and what do you get? Over the next 30 years or so, the amount of interest that we have to pay as of today is $567.7 million. Hey, that's enough to fix the streets for the next 10 years, isn't it? Oh yes. But naturally, we need the debt in order to do the various projects that have been funded with that money. I'd like to say that the staff has done a pretty good job coming up with various options on additional funds that could go towards that $55 million goal. Right now, our city staff is putting together a proposal that they'll bring back to the city council. I suspect it'll probably be sometime in June. At the last meeting they talked about a month needed to do additional investigative work in deciding, number one, how much of a street user fee they would propose and where other dollars might come from. Under our city charter, our city manager is required to present to the city council his proposed budget for the coming year. The end of May. He usually does it at the city council meeting, the last meeting in May. And what did I do with, I had a calendar here, and I don't know what I did with it. Oh. Well, anyway, it's the last meeting in May. He's going to present his budget. And I imagine that's going to take a priority in the staff time of putting together a proposed budget, which they'll discuss during the month of June, July, making changes and ending up adopting their budget, usually about the third week in July. But in his spare time, he's got to be working, putting together his proposal for where the dollars for the street maintenance fund is going to come from. Now we have heard over the last several weeks mentioned by a couple of council people and by the city staff in response to their questions that the over 65 exemption, that's the homestead exemption that the Taxpayers Association was responsible for passing back in 1980, would bring in, the staff said, about $1.5 million if it were not granted. And under the law that we petitioned for the election, where the voters approved the $50,000 homestead exemption for the senior and disabled folks. There's a section in section 1113, as a matter of fact, in the property tax code. And let me just read that to you because it is very pertinent. In the event they decide to mess with that over 65 exemption, the governing body of the taxing unit by a favorable vote of a majority of the qualified voters of the taxing unit at an election called by the governing body of the taxing unit, and the governing body shall call the election on the petition of at least 20% of the number of qualified voters who voted in the preceding election of the taxing unit. The amount of exemption adopted as provided by subsection D of this section is $3,000 of the appraised value of the resident homestead, unless a larger amount is specified by the governing body authorizing the exemption, if the exemption is authorized as provided by subdivision 1 of subsection D of this section, or the petition for the election, if the exemption is authorized as provided by subdivision 2 of subsection D of this section. And here's the key to what could happen. Once authorized, an exemption adopted as provided by subsection D of this section may be repealed, or decreased, or increased in amount by the governing body of the taxing unit, or by the procedure authorized by subdivision 2 of subsection D of this section. In this case, in the case of a decrease, the amount of the exemption may not be reduced to less than $3,000 of the market value. Seeing as how in the past week or so the appraisal district has sent out notices on the appraised value of all the various properties in the city, I thought it was quite appropriate to mention that if city staff comes up with a proposal to eliminate or reduce the $50,000 exemption, which would bring in, according to their figures, about $1.5 million, which I dispute. One of the problems in coming up with a ballpark number is that in addition to the exemption, when the disabled or senior citizens who turn 65 or become disabled, their taxes are frozen. So subsequently, eliminating the $50,000 exemption, to my way of thinking, would only apply to new people when they turn 65 or become disabled. And how they figure out just how much money would be lost is beyond my comprehension at the moment. In the event they were to do away with it, then the taxpayers would have to think about whether or not we wanted to go along with the proposal, go out with another petition for a homestead exemption and an amount Could be 50,000, could be 75,000, could be any number. That's something that we'd have to think about when the time comes. Where can this city find an additional $55 million each and every year to spend on our street maintenance program? Well, as I said, staff has done a good job presenting various options, but they have omitted mentioning one item that we've mentioned on this program previously. The city of Corpus Christi spent $17 million of your money to purchase the Garwood water. Now the Garwood water is the right to draw 35,000 acre-feet of water from the Colorado River each and every year in perpetuity. To date, we have not seen one drop of that water. Now, talk is another pipeline is needed from the Colorado River to the Lavaca Navidad area, about 40 miles roughly, in order to tie in the water from the Colorado River to the Mary Rose pipeline for transport to Corpus Christi. What's another pipeline going to cost? Oh, 120, 150 million, ballpark numbers. Where's that money going to come from? Out of your pocket? You see how this thing goes on and on and on? And the city of Corpus Christi never seems to have enough money, does it? It's always looking for new sources. Where can they get more dollars? And yet, when the citizens come up with a proposal, they don't have any money in order to fund whatever the proposal is the citizen come up with. It's a never-ending battle that goes on forever. Now, I think our new city manager is doing a fine job. So far, he has major problems down there that he's trying to straighten out. And I would hope that we can all cooperate and help him out in his job. But when it comes to raising another $55 million, they're talking $20 a month added to your utility bill. I don't think that's going to happen. If it does, I think there'll be a lot of very, very unhappy voters come November in this community. But what about the Garwood water that we paid for and haven't seen? Here's an idea. And right now, all it is an idea that I think the city staff should investigate. Lease the 35,000 acre-feet of water from the Colorado River to whoever will pay the tab. Who would want to pay for that water? Well, let's see. The city of San Antonio has been looking for new supplies of water. But how about the rice farmers of East Texas who have depended, in fact, they've made their livelihood by utilizing water from the Colorado River in order to fund their rice crop every year in East Texas. If you've been reading your local newspaper over the last several weeks, from time to time you would have seen some articles stating that because of the drought we have here in Texas, that water no longer is available for the rice farmers. As a matter of fact, if memory serves me right, I think there was an article that referred to about 35,000 acre-feet of water that the rice farmers got every year in order to water their rice crops. I think at a very minimum, our city staff should make an attempt to talk to the rice farmers in East Texas and see whether or not they might be interested in 35,000 acre-feet of water that the city of Corpus Christi has purchased from the Colorado River for $17 million. Not selling it, but leasing it, which I think is a brilliant idea. 2-3-year lease. How much money would that bring in? There's no telling. I don't have a clue. How about you? Pick a number, I guess, huh? Could be in the millions of dollars. We wouldn't know until we explored the issue with the rice farmers to see whether or not they could come up with some substantial bucks in order to purchase 35,000 acre-feet of water that the city of Corpus Christi has readily available. I say readily available. What happens if we go out and build the pipeline from the Colorado River to the Lavaca Navidad area, spending $120, $150 million, whatever that number amounts to, and then we discover that because of the drought, that water is not available. What does that mean? What sort of implications does that have? Unfortunately, to my way of thinking, it has implications of more legal entanglements, more time being spent down at the courthouse, more time with lawyers running up sizable amounts of money that has to come out of the taxpayer's pocket in order to straighten that situation out. I just mentioned this as one option that the city has evidently overlooked. Now, in their financial statement, they state that everything is fine and dandy. They're working on the pipeline, phase 2 of the Mary Roads pipeline, to get that Colorado River water where it could tie into the Mary Roads pipeline. On page 6 of the city's comprehensive annual financial statement, there's a very interesting line, and I'm going to read it verbatim. And I quote, "The city's unrestricted net assets, $56.7 million for 2011, are used to finance day-to-day operations." And listen to this now. "The city has sufficient funds to meet requirements for cash outlays in the next fiscal year, as well as the financial capacity to meet its long-term obligations without major reductions in fund balances or net assets." Unquote. That's a pretty interesting line, isn't it? The city has sufficient funds. Hey, if that's the case, What's all this talk about needing $55 million to fix our streets? There's something screwed up here a little bit, don't you think? I think. Now, that's not to take anything away from the city's comprehensive financial statement at all. There's a lot of information contained in that document. City staff spends a lot of time putting this together. But here's another interesting line or two to give you something to think about. The City Council's second strategic goal regarding completion of the utilities master plan updates is well underway. Listen to this now. A long-range plan for water and wastewater are currently being developed, and construction of Mary Roads Pipeline Phase 2 is on schedule. Additionally, city staff will explore a dedicated stormwater funding source. Did you get that last line? Additionally, city staff will explore a dedicated stormwater funding source. So $55 million for streets isn't the only source of funds that we need for the future of our city, is it? No, it's just a number. And here they are talking about needing a funding source for wastewater. Now I recall that several years back, under Mary Roads, I believe, there was a committee appointed to study that particular subject. Where could they come up with additional money to fund our wastewater projects, our stormwater projects? And the committee, strange as it may seem, after studying it, voted against any stormwater additional funding. Interesting. It's strange how things happen in this town, and yet the publicity never seems to amount to very much, does it? No, it doesn't. Here's another line that I think is great. Additionally, long-range plans are currently under development regarding stormwater funding, water supply, street maintenance, and completion of the Garwood Pipeline project. Boy, that's a mouthful right there. At least they did mention our streets, didn't they? They didn't mention 55 million, but that was the work of another committee. And there goes our buzzer. Has our program elapsed already? Ladies and gentlemen, we hope we've given you something to think about, and we hope that we'll see you again next time, because remember, silence is not the answer.